Well, hi everybody. I'm Pam Otto. I work for the St. Charles Park District as the Outreach Ambassador. Today I'm here in what I would call one of my local natural habitats. That's Norris Woods. I came here today to walk amongst the trees, look at some of the flowers, and also check out some of the birds. We're in the midst of spring migration now in the month of May. I've heard some lovely species. I've seen some lovely species too. There's warblers coming through. We've got some fabulous resident species as well. Our chickadees have been calling back and forth, and of course our robins and our cardinals. What I'd like to do today though is show you, walk you through some slides to let you get to know some of these birds, some of which may be familiar to you and some of which may be brand new. But I'd like to share some tips and tricks for identification as well as some stories. Come with me now and we'll go through those slides. Well, here we are. Our slide presentation today is called Watch the Birdie, Reflections on Our Feathered Friends. First of all, though, I wanted to thank Sandy and Gayleen for helping get this program set up. Sandy, I think when we talked last fall, we had no idea that the program would be occurring in this sort of a format. And I have to admit, this is the first time I've done this, so I hope it goes smoothly. We can't really open the program up for questions, but as you'll see at the end, there will be some contact information. So if you'd like to know more, make note of that and we'll get you some answers. And before we get into the true stars of today's show, which are the birds, I wanted to just kind of get us set directionally. Here we are, we're looking at an overview of the St. Charles area, and you can see that nice line going down the middle. This is the Fox River, and this is one of the reasons why our spring migration season is just so wonderfully abundant. We actually live in what's known as the Mississippi Flyway. Birds that are coming up to this area and beyond from Central America and South America fly along guideposts such as waterways. The Mississippi is actually, we're part of the greater Mississippi watershed. The Fox River flows into the Illinois, which then hits the Mississippi. So birds, if you can think of the waterways in our country as sort of road maps, and a lot of birds take the Fox River up through this area and then continue north into the upper peninsula of Michigan, Minnesota, and up into southern and even northern Canada. So that kind of sets the scene for some of the birds we're going to talk about today. It doesn't, however, address the first bird we're going to talk about. Now this bird, I consider the true sign that spring is on its way, but it's not the bird that's most often associated with it. I think that title, most of us would agree, goes to the robin, but it's this fella here. When the male red-winged blackbird starts showing up, that's the sign. That's when we start to know that winter is coming to a close. In our area, red-winged blackbirds show up anywhere from, say, maybe this middle of February to maybe towards the end of February. Still calendar-wise in winter, but these fellas come up ahead. The males come up ahead of the females to set up their breeding territories. Speaking of the females, this is what they look like. We've had a lot of calls and emails to the Park District inquiring about these large sparrows that are showing up at bird feeders. When you look at the female red-winged blackbird, she does sort of look sparrow-like. She's certainly got a lot of brown on her, but look, she's got a prominent eye stripe here. And she's also much larger. She's almost the same size as the male red-winged blackbird. So she's larger than our average sparrows. Red-winged blackbirds, let's face it, they have a reputation. Males guard their breeding territory quite fiercely. And hopefully this will help you understand a little bit more where they're coming from. The red-winged blackbird species is a polygynous species, which means that one male might have several females as mates. So as the breeding season progresses and there's nests and there's young, this fella is just driving himself bonkers trying to protect 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wives plus all the kids. So he kind of goes into overdrive. The markings here, we call these the epaulets. He flashes those to potential threats, whether it's another bird or another human. A lot of you may be familiar with this scene. You may have gotten bonked on the head. Let me ask you though, have you ever gotten bonked on the face? I'm going to wager that you haven't. Red-winged blackbirds, they do want to defend their territory, but they don't want to get hurt in the process. So they will usually go at any potential threats, whether it's a cat or a hawk or a human. They'll come at you from behind because they don't want to undergo any sort of, they don't want to put themselves up to harm by coming towards the face or the eyes where someone could strike back and hurt them. Here's a little clue, a couple little clues. First of all, let's listen to their typical song. This, you probably have heard this, whether you're near a wetland or maybe you're out on the golf course. That is a blackbird, a male redwing saying, "Hey everybody, I'm here, this is mine." That's a territory song that he uses to claim his area. Now, if you're walking along and you hear something like this, these are warnings. If you hear that sound, see if you can find where it's coming from. Remember what I said, these birds do not fly towards your eyes. So if you could spot him before he spots you, you can save yourself a bonk on the head. Another tip I share, I don't know if anybody has actually taken me up on it other than one person who did this on his bicycle helmet, but if you can put a pair of eyes, if you find yourself being troubled by a red-winged blackbird, if you take a pair of those googly eyes and you put them on the back of a hat, a baseball hat, my friend put it on the back of his bicycle helmet because he was continually getting bonked on the head as he rode on the Fox River Trail. Eyes do act as a repellent towards these guys. So as I said, when they see eyes, they don't fly towards them. So if you hear these warning calls when you're out and about, turn towards them, and chances are they will turn away from you. All right. Now our next couple of species, I wouldn't call them our most colorful, but they are some of our most beautiful the song sparrows. Depending on where you're at with your birding skills, you might tend to lump all the sparrows in together and say, oh, it's brown, it's a sparrow. In fact, even amongst birders, there's a group of birds called the LBJs, little brown jobs, because sometimes the identification of these sparrows and similar species can get really kind of gnarly. But song sparrows, they tend to show up in our area in early March. They're another, what I would call, true sign of spring. And to differentiate them from our much more common house sparrows, let's look a little bit here. There's a little bit of marking here on the crown, but really what you want to see are some speckles across the breast here, and then this dot, which we call the tie tack, right in the middle of the breast. So speckles above, and then the breast with the dot in the middle in a song that is usually a variation on this. Sweet, 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 blah, 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 blah. Sweet, 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 blah, blah, blah. Now these birds, these males, they do learn this call, so there is going to be variation from bird to bird. But when you start hearing this, you know spring is on the way. Another common sparrow in our neighborhoods these is the chipping sparrow. Now, just to contrast what we looked at with the song sparrow, you'll notice there is a rufous cap here, but there's no stripe through the middle. There's a clear breast and there's no tie tack in the middle. The chipping sparrows too, they're quite a bit smaller than the other, what I would call the common chunky sparrow size that we see like with our house sparrows. The chipping sparrow has another name that it goes by. It's also known as the hairbird. These birds make a nest that's a shallow cup, and their signature, so to speak, is to line it with hair. Now, back in the day of horse and buggy travel, horsehair was often used to line their nests. But these days, what we often find is either dog fur or human hair. I've seen different hair salons where they actually put the hair outside for birds. Not every bird will choose hair as a lining for their nest, but the chipping sparrow definitely does. Now, their song isn't quite as melodic as the song sparrow, but it's definitely recognizable. It's almost mechanical in its sound. Let's take a listen here to the sound, a song of the chipping. You can hear this. This recording has two individuals kind of duking it out. Again, when birds sing, they're often declaring a territory, and these two birds were letting each other know just where their boundaries lie. Now, this next slide here shows probably one of the earliest arriving of our longer distance migrators. The warblers often come from a much greater distance than the sparrows. As we go through our spring migration. Yellow rumps usually are here in this area by, sometimes late March or early April. Here on the right-hand side, we've got a picture of the female, and you can see how the species gets its name. Their rump truly is yellow. The male is a little bit more colorful. He's got some yellow up here as well underneath his wings. I'm not going to go through all the warblers that appear in our area because there are a lot. And frankly, some of them can get a little tricky with the ID. I would like to refer you to a couple of references online. One is called All About Birds. And if you just Google that, that is the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's website. It is just wonderful. It's one of the best online field guides, so to speak, that I'm aware of. There's another, if any of you are into apps on your phones, there's an app called Merlin that is quite good for referencing bird identifications. But yellow rumps, when we start seeing them, we know that spring is definitely here. To contrast the yellow rump, the Blackburnian warbler is, I would argue, to be one of our most colorful species. These birds are truly stunning. Even the females, most females tend to be drabber in color because of their job of sitting on nests and protecting young. They want to blend in with the surroundings. And it's usually the males who are more flashy, but even the female Blackburnian warbler has a considerable amount of color to her. But look at this male. He is on fire. He's got some deep gold and orange, contrasting with the black cap on his head, a little bit of white on the wings, some streaking along the sides. These are truly a wonderful gift to see in the springtime. I'd like to reference another great website. It's KaneCountyAudubon.org. Some of you might be familiar with this group. They're a wonderful asset to the community. They do a lot of outreach. They also hold monthly meetings. If any of you are interested, as I mentioned before, my contact information is at the end. I'd love to get you set up with more information about Kane County Audubon. They have on their website a checklist that shows all the birds that can be seen in Kane County throughout the year. It's a handy reference to use along with some of those other identifications I mentioned before, like Merlin and All About Birds. Now we get into some of the larger birds, the non-warblers, which leaves a whole lot of other different types of species. But the rose-breasted grosbeak, I just saw one of these the other day at my neighbor's bird feeder. Truly a gorgeous species. And again, we've got quite a difference between the males and the females. They're well named. Gros kind of mean large. And here we can see that their beak is truly quite large. That's so they can crunch open different types of seeds. Here's one feeding on some, looks like sunflower seeds. The female Again, a quick glance, she might look like a big chunky sparrow, but she is considerably larger than, say, the house sparrow. She's got a pretty prominent eye line here. That large beak is going to be one of the giveaways. You can also listen for the grosbeak song. Let's take a listen. It's a very clear sounding whistle. This bird and the oriole have what I think of as similar tones to their songs. The songs themselves are different, but just when you hear that sort of clear, cutting whistle in the air, you know that there's somebody very special nearby that's singing it. Let's take a quick listen, since we just mentioned it, to the Baltimore. Again, very clear notes. Orioles are not just passing through right now, but some of them are actually setting up their breeding territories, because this is a species that does nest here. The oriole, you might be familiar with the oriole's nest, that they make those sort of pendulous baskets. You see them up and down the Fox River, as well as in neighborhoods where there's a good canopy cover, maybe some older oaks in the neighborhood. Baltimore orioles are a species that will come to feeders, not for seed, but if you put out grape jelly or halves of oranges, they are quite drawn to those sweet types of foods. I will put one little caveat there with the grape jelly. If you think about doing this, it's wonderful. You can use an old jar lid. An old peanut butter jar lid works wonderfully. But please, 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 when you buy your grape jelly, make sure it does not contain high fructose corn syrup. An ingredient that's not so good for people, and it's also been proven that it's not so good for birds either. Next, we have the scarlet tanager. This bird has been seen in this area quite recently. It has a song that is described as a robin with a sore throat. Let's see if we can take a listen here. You might be familiar with the call of the robin, cheery up, cheerio, cheery up, cheerio. People oftentimes will liken the scarlet tanager. The scarlet tanager song has a similar sort of pattern to it, but it's got a more raspy quality to it. So we do refer to that as the robin with a sore throat. Just a gorgeous bird, though. Just a very bright red color. Males contrast that with dark wings. And again, we see a little bit more drabness with the female, but I've seen some of these female scarlet tanagers that this yellow has a greenish note to it, and they're quite beautiful in their own right. Indigo buntings also can be found coming to feeders at this time of year. I just got a call yesterday about a gentleman who'd never seen one before. These are gorgeous. The blue on these male indigo buntings is just stunning. These birds are kind of small in size, I would say, roughly sparrow size, maybe just a skosh larger. Their song they have quite a long song. Birders, as they're learning bird calls, will oftentimes put words to the bird song to help them remember it. For the indigo bunting, because there's a lot of chattering going on there, I've heard the words fire, fire, hurry, hurry, quick, quick, put it out. If you hear that call repeatedly in your yard or in woods nearby, you can know that you're listening to an indigo bunting who's calling to protect his breeding territory. Now, we've got a couple of birds that nest here in our area that belong to a family called the Mimidae, which are the mimics. One is the brown thrasher, and the thrasher, honestly, has had some hard times as land use in our area has changed. they've lost a lot of the shrubby cover that they prefer. Now, in some areas, that is starting to come back. I know a lot of people who have planted their yards now with native shrubs and other flowering plants that has created habitat that brown thrashers find quite appealing. I love to listen to these guys because they just go on and on. All right, I think you get the picture. That recording is actually over 4 minutes long. But the brown thrasher, as do mockingbirds and the catbird, which we're also going to take a look at. These birds are all, as I mentioned, in the Mimidae family, which are mimics. They incorporate the songs of other birds into their repertoires. The catbird, as I mentioned, is also a member of that family. Very, very chatty. The difference in song is there's frankly not a lot. I didn't put in a recording of a catbird, but if you happen to have a lot of berry bushes, I know in my yard I've lined the back with elderberry, and that is a favorite favorite food of the catbird. They will sit there, usually nest within the elderberry, and then you'll just hear, I'll hear in the morning just an endless phrase after phrase from these birds as they mimic the calls of other species in the area. The catbird, I wouldn't call it our flashiest summertime visitor, but it does have some things to note. The body is pretty much slate gray. It has a black cap, and then note underneath the tail, we've got some rufous or reddish coloring here. These birds don't often come out in the open. Their song, that endless mimicking of other birds, is their giveaway. But if you're lucky, you can catch a glimpse of this, I think, very cute summertime visitor. Now, as we talk about birds that we like to attract to our yard, I don't know that there's any species more coveted than the hummingbird. People put out nectar feeders, perhaps you do, in your own yard. The color red is known to attract them, but please, please, please don't put any red food coloring in your feeders. Just the sweet treat itself is enough. That just as we saw with high fructose corn syrup, adding coloring to a hummingbird's food can be quite damaging to them in the long run. I also wanted to point out, though, here we've got the male, and you can see his bright ruby throat. The females, however, have a clear throat. They do not have a marking on their throat, and the male's ruby red throat sometimes can appear black depending on how the light hits it. A good thing to keep in mind if you're looking at a hummingbird and you're like, well, it doesn't look like a ruby throat. Technically speaking, ruby-throated hummingbirds are the only hummingbird species that occurs in our area, although the last several years we have, especially during migration, seen a species known as the rufous hummingbird. But ruby throat is pretty much the hummingbird for our area. I wanted to point out one other thing. This individual here, and I wish I could say I'd taken this picture, but this was just taken from a birding website that shows how hummingbirds, even though they're known for sipping nectar, they do also grab insects. I remember a time a few years ago, I was walking along the Fox River down in Batavia, and I saw what I at first thought was an insect, a big bug flying in the air, and then I realized no, it couldn't possibly be an insect. The way it was behaving, it was flying from a branch out above the water and then landing back on a branch again. And I realized it was a hummingbird, and it was picking caddisflies out of the air. So even though they've got this narrow needle-like bill that's just so perfectly adapted for slurping nectar out of trumpet-shaped flowers, they do also pick insects, and in fact, insects are a very important part of their diet, especially when they're migrating and also when they're raising their young. Speaking of insect eaters, eastern bluebirds are valued, one for their color. Here's the male, and here's the female. But that stunning blue contrasted with the orangish cast across the breast is just such a wonderful sign of summertime here in the Midwest. These birds tend to prefer open areas. If you've got an expansive yard and you've tried to attract bluebirds, you can put a box up. We'll though have to monitor the bluebird box because the boxes are quite attracted to another species, the house sparrows, which won't get into their behavior too much other than that they just wreak havoc on so many of our native cavity nesters. But the bluebird does make a welcome addition to a yard for its insect eating abilities. I tossed in a slide here though that I thought was kind of neat. Now clearly this picture was taken in a yard where someone has placed mealworms in a feeder. That is a commonly sold insect food for this insect eating bird. But this parent here, this father bluebird, has a mouthful of mealworms and he's feeding his offspring here. This speckling on the breast indicates that this is a young bluebird. It also indicates that bluebirds are members of the thrush family. Our most common thrush species in the area is the American robin, but we also have wood thrushes here, and during migrations we see hermit thrush and Swainson's thrush, and also sometimes the gray-cheeked thrush. But I always think it's kind of neat to see this reminder. If you've ever seen a baby robin, you know they have a speckled breast as well. But even though the adults are quite dissimilar, their heritage, that thrush heritage shows up in the young with that speckled breast. Now, another bird that people put up houses for is the house wren. I'll tell you, my grandfather was a huge house wren fan. They too are insect eaters. They're quite handy to have in the yard. Let's listen to this song. You may be hearing this now. The wrens are definitely back. That's the song of the male. He sings to declare and defend his territory. He's also quite busy now. Besides singing and warning other birds of his presence, he's also building stick nests in bird houses. A lot of people want to attract wrens. They'll put up houses for wrens. I did, though, want to mention they do have a not so nice habit of trying to keep their territory clear. This picture shows what can happen when a house wren moves into an area and tries to get rid of the competition. These are bluebird eggs that have been pierced and then chucked from a bluebird house by a house wren. So just keep in mind, like I said, my grandfather was a huge house wren fan. If you want to attract them, feel free to go for it, but do bear in mind that they're not always nice to their avian neighbors. Here we have the black-capped chickadee. Now, this bird, I tell you, when I was I think I was in junior high, and I would walk to school in the springtime, and I would hear this song, and it just puzzled me to no end. You've probably heard it too. And maybe you know that is the song of the black-capped chickadee. They're actually named for another sound that they make, chickadee-dee-dee. That's more of a alert sound, a warning sound that they make. But these birds are pretty common throughout our area, and they're year-round residents. Some folks put up houses because these birds too are cavity nesters. In fact, I would encourage, if you have a tree with a dead branch, and it maybe consider leaving that branch up as long as it's not posing a hazard, because these birds will move in. It'll also prevent things like this. This happened on a friend of mine's house. She has nice pillars in front, and one of the pillars had a weak spot that the chickadee quickly identified and moved in and raised a family there. So just be aware, they're not often recognized as cavity nesters, which, as are woodpeckers and other flickers and birds like that. But chickadees do, they can excavate or they'll move into a ready-made hole that another bird has left behind. A lot of people like to put up purple martin houses. These birds are often touted as being wonderful for insect control, and in fact, they do eat insects. That's, I think, all that they eat. They also have a nice burbling kind of a call. If you've ever been out to Hickory Knolls, our Park District Nature Center, you might know that we have 3 or maybe it's even 4 purple martin houses lining the soccer fields to the north of the building. Those houses have been maintained for over 20 years by a dedicated volunteer, Michael Swanson, and he works very hard to make sure that the houses are cleaned every year, that we don't get any European starling invasions, and he always touts their insect eating abilities. Now, one thing I will caution you about, they don't necessarily eat the insects we want to get rid of, like mosquitoes. The height that purple martins fly at also happens to be the height that dragonflies fly at. Dragonflies are actually a wonderful control measure if we're looking to get rid of mosquitoes. As juveniles, dragonflies eat a lot of mosquito larvae in the water, and after they transform into adults and leave the water and fly away, they eat adult mosquitoes in the air. But purple martins eat an astounding number of dragonflies. So keep that in mind if you're considering, or if you have a purple martin house at your house. Just remember, it's not always the mosquitoes they're going after. Now, we've got one final bird here, and we are so blessed here in St. Charles to have a good number of these birds called chimney swifts. They're actually, of all the birds we've looked at, they're probably the closest related to hummingbirds, which just blows my mind because these birds are not colorful. They don't have that iridescence that we see on the hummingbird. They don't have throat patch the way the hummingbird does. They do, though, have a very similar anatomy, a wing structure. When you watch a chimney swift fly, if you can, the birds are always on the move, but they have a very stiff wing beat, very similar to that, what we see in the hummingbird. They also have very weak legs and aren't really able to perch or land and take off again in the way other bird species do. For that reason, they tend to colonize in chimneys. They'll roost in chimneys, they'll nest in chimneys. They have to hang vertically, as this bird is here, in order to be able to take off and fly again. A chimney swift on the ground is usually going to need a little bit of help to get take off again. These birds, too, are wonderful insect eaters. Living here in the river town that we do, you know, we get occasional eruptions of caddisflies, sometimes mayflies, that come out of the river by the hundreds of thousands, I would say even the millions in the case of some of the caddisflies. Those birds, you know, we call, or those insects, you know, that we call the river bugs. Well, the chimney swifts are here to help us keep those numbers under control. If you're in downtown St. Charles or Geneva or Batavia, really anywhere up and down the Fox River, you probably are familiar with the sound of the chimney. The birds chatter almost constantly as they're flying and eating bugs. They leave their roost first thing in the morning, they fly all day long, and then they come in at night. Now, in our area, I can't put a number on the chimney swift population, but They have actually throughout their range, their numbers have been going down. We're looking at a bird here that historically, prior to European settlement, these birds nested in caves or in hollow trees. Well, as settlers moved in, they started building homes with chimneys. These birds found these structures to be just fabulous places to nest and to roost. They only stay around, because they're insect eaters, they only stay around here through about late September or early October. They come back again in April. They nest, as I was saying, they nest in chimneys, but you might see a chimney with several dozen birds going down to it in the summertime, but of all those birds, only one pair is allowed to nest. Somehow they work out this social structure where there's one nesting pair only per chimney type structure. There's a pretty active group within Kane County Audubon. Rich and Marion Miller kind of head up the education effort on chimney swifts throughout the Kane County area. They have kind of fostered an appreciation for these birds. And in the fall, as the birds are migrating, they have a tremendous distance that they fly back down to South America. They will come through and roost in a lot of chimneys in town. But the problem they're facing is that a lot of our modern chimneys are capped or they're lined. Only in some of the older buildings in town do they find what they're looking for. For many years, they roosted in the chimney at Marbury Cleaners over on Main Street, downtown St. Charles. This past year, though, they kind of hopped from Marbury over to one of the chimneys at Burgess Norton on Stevens Street in Stevens and 6th Street in Geneva. Working here at the Park District, right in downtown St. Charles, I hear and I see these birds every day. I was leaving the office one evening last fall, I believe it was late September or early October, and I could hear that chattering sound. And I looked up and I wondered, gosh, could they possibly be nesting in the Baker Building? Well, they're not, because our chimneys are capped. But across the street at the old post office, that's now Doc Morgan's, I saw this cloud up above here's the old post office here, and I thought, I wonder if they're going into this chimney. I ran up the stairs of the parking garage that's there and set my camera up. I started watching. Now, this is during my fall migration. Turned out to be over 800 chimney swifts going down into this chimney structure. This is only a portion. This video was originally about 3 minutes long, but they form a funnel and they go down into the chimney. One bird kind of starts it, and then they all follow afterwards, and they stay there overnight, and then they take off again the next morning. It's really a remarkable sight to see, and I encourage you, as you're out and about in the downtown area, to keep an eye to the sky for this neat summertime visitor. Well, I suppose we should wrap things up here, folks. It's been over 40 minutes, and if I don't stop now, gosh, there's over close to 250 different species on that King County Audubon checklist. We could be here all night. I did, though, want to close with just a couple of tips. You as gardeners, I'm sure, are aware of the sorts of plants you found that attract animals, specifically birds, to your yard. But I wanted to just kind of reinforce that concept of habitat. We haven't really talked much about that, but a habitat is an animal's home. It consists of food, water, shelter, and space. We just wanted to quickly run down through this list. And when we think of food for birds, I think we all can picture a bird feeder in the yard. Many of you probably have them. Bird feeders are great, but if you do have one, I'm sure you're aware, there's quite a bit of maintenance involved. There's the cast shells that occur underneath the feeder. There's also the regular maintenance of the feeder itself, washing it so that it doesn't spread disease. If you'd like a little more, I can't quite say maintenance free, but an easier way to feed the birds, you might want to consider incorporating some native plants into your yard. Now here we have a picture of the native plant demonstration garden that's behind the Pottawatomie Community Center. We've got all kinds of plants that grow in different sorts of settings. We've got towards the south end of the garden our prairie plants that need more sun. Towards the north end of the garden we have our woodland plants that can tolerate shade. Might be worth a visit sometime to get some ideas for incorporating natives into your yard, because those native plants, besides being nice to look at, they provide our birds with food. Those lovely flowers that we look at when it's warm out turn to seeds in the fall and winter, and birds can come in and feed on those with no help from us. You'll notice on our list of habitat elements, I've got water with a bunch of asterisks around it. I would argue that water is even more important than food sources. I'm showing you here the little bird bath that I put on my deck a couple of years ago. I just love this thing. I can plug it in the winter so the water doesn't freeze, and then tuck the cord away in the summertime. I get birds on my deck every single day. Water, when you think about it, can be kind of hard to come by sometimes. If it's wintertime, the water is frozen. And in the summertime, it's not always convenient and it's not always clean. But adding a source of water, whether it's a simple bird bath like what I have, or something a little more attractive like a water feature or a pond, is certainly something to consider incorporating and would be very attractive to birds. And when we talk about shelter, we're not talking about birdhouses specifically, although that would be one type of shelter. I was thinking more in terms of plantings. Here's some oak leaf hydrangea that we have at the native plant garden. You can see how those thick leaves provide a lot of cover. They're great hiding spaces for a lot of birds. And then in the winter time, evergreens are wonderful, even though they're not technically native plants. Our spruces, our pines, our firs, they all add a wonderful element of shelter, especially if we get a little snow cover. Those boughs protect animals from winds and even colder temperatures. There's an insulating value that occurs inside of those boughs, and creates a nice form of shelter for our birds and our other animal friends. Space is the other element of habitat that's kind of self-explanatory. Animals do need a place to move around, and most of our yards will offer something of that nature. If you have any questions about what we've talked about today, or as I mentioned when I was talking with Sandy and Gayleen about this program, I would really like to meet with any of you who would be interested in going on a little bit of a bird walk. We do have the COVID restrictions still in place. In fact, the Park District has now canceled all its programming through the month of June. However, if we get into phase 3 and restore Illinois, we can gather in groups of up to 10. If you're interested in that, drop me a line at my email, potto@stcparks.org, or leave a message on my voicemail, 630-513-4346. It'd be great to get together. Even if you're not interested in going out to look at some of these birds, if you have any questions about what we talked about, both of those contact methods are available for you. I'd love to hear from you. Again, I appreciate your time today. I hope you're able to get out and enjoy the birds sooner rather than later. Take care now. Bye-bye.